Hi, good morning everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning about creating meaningful experiences in the age of COVID-19. My name is Celia Romaniuk. I lead Fjord in the Nordics and I'm the head of our design business for Accenture Interactive in the Nordics also. So today we're going to be talking about the situation we're in right now. I think it's fair to say that we live in interesting times. I don't need to talk about that much in great depth because we're all so aware of the current challenges that we face. One of my, one of the funniest things to me at the moment is to see these sort of photos of social media where you see people sitting in, in aeroplanes with masks on, or footballers socially distanced on a football field, and people saying, imagine explaining this photo to someone in 2019. The things that we're seeing now are quite unprecedented. Within the team at Fjord, we put together the trends every year, and this year, as we put them together last year rather, our meta theme for the trends was about realigning the fundamentals. So it was really about saying, already last year we were saying we are facing these extraordinary shifts in the way that we think about business and technology and human experiences. And at the time, we thought, is this going a little far? Is it a little edgy? But I think, the changes that we've seen since then have really, shown us just how true that was and how things have accelerated even more. So although that's, that may sound a bit sort of pessimistic, we actually think that it's really important to take the optimistic view in these times of crisis and really seek to understand what is going on with people, how is human behaviour changing, and how can we find ways to actually make our world better and address these changes in a positive way. I was reading about the civil rights activist Angela Davis the other day, and I read a quote from her that I thought was really fantastic and inspiring, which is, she said, she was asked what advice she would give to the Black Lives Matter movement, and she said, the most important thing from where I stand is to begin to give expression to ideas about what to do next. And that resonated with me, and I know it resonates with us in the team, and hopefully with you in the audience as well. So today we have two fantastic speakers. I'll just introduce them briefly. So we have Mark Curtis, who's sitting in the UK. Mark and I have known each other for a long time from the early days of Fjord. Mark is heading our innovation and thought leadership practice within Accenture Interactive globally. He's also one of the co-founders of Fjord and really crucial to our trends work and the thought leadership we bring out every year. So he'll be talking today about how do we understand these changes in behaviour that we're seeing in the world right now. And we also have Marianne Hjaltelin, who's sitting in Copenhagen. Marianne is the Chief Commercial Officer for Hjaltelin Stahl, which is our creative agency here, part of Accenture Interactive in the Nordics. Marianne's background is in digital and creative strategy and planning, and she's going to be sharing with us some great work that we've been doing with one of our clients in Denmark. So just finally, one more note from me before we get started. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. There's a Q&A function you should see on your screen. We should have time to ask some questions after the different speakers. So I hope you enjoy the next hour. With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with you this morning. So there's a lot to pack into 20 minutes, so I'm going to get going immediately. Kaisa, if we can move on the slide, please. This all started really quite early in COVID when we began to look at what was going on, and we realized that we were seeing the biggest forced experiments in behavior change all over the world that we've ever seen, ever. And that behavior change was very important to study, because how people behave therefore affects the experiences that we're going to put out there. I think that experiential point has borne in on us more and more over the last 4 months, because COVID-19 experientially is something that has happened to all of us together. So I'm lucky enough to talk to people all over the world, and have been during the pandemic, and everybody is sharing similar experiences. I can honestly say I have not talked to a market who said, don't know what you're talking about, this doesn't apply to us. All of the anecdotes are similar from place to place. The second thing is that the structure of every experience we have has been affected dramatically. And I love talking about, if you take it down to a really simple experiential chain, buying a pint of milk, sorry, I should say litre of milk, I'm being very British there. If buying a litre of milk, the structure of that experience has fundamentally shifted. You depending on where you are, you may have to find a face mask before you leave the house. You walk or drive to the shop. Outside the shop, you have to queue in a socially distanced queue. You get into the shop, you have to pay attention to floor markings telling you to stay 2 meters apart from people. You find the milk, that's the easy bit. You get to the window. The window, by the way, is now plexiglass separating from the cashier in case you sneeze on each other. You pay with a contactless payment. You're probably doing that in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, and Finland before anyway, but in many parts of the world they were not. You then leave, and just to make it really ram it home, you get home and your family will ask you to wash down the bottle of milk and your hands for 20 seconds as well. So experientially, buying a litre of milk just changed completely. And so the structure of everything has changed, but also because if you take the example I've just given, we're very aware of the experiences we have. We're talking about it. It was like, we're talking about, wow, why is it so difficult to do this? Or how do I go about doing that when everything has changed so much? So what that means is we've got this terrific shift in our focus on experiences, and we have to do this because experience is right at the heart of this. Kaisa, could we move on, please? So we began also to think about, well, because obviously, at the stage at which you begin to think this through, you think, well, what's it going to look like after the next? It's easy to use terminology like now and next, but actually what's going to be after next? And we could hear people beginning to talk about the new normal. And intellectually, it struck us that new normal was not something we could say. And it's not something you can say because you've got three things going on here. You've got the epidemiological uncertainty. We do not know where the disease exit is. And right now, I'm sure you've looked at the headlines about what's happening in Beijing as much as I have. We don't know what or when the exit is. We have the recession uncertainty. Is it U-shaped, V-shaped, or God help us, W-shaped? And then we've got the people uncertainty. And the people uncertainty is the one that we can do something about. But that triple uncertainty, or when you put it all together, next slide, please, means that we have to really talk about this as a never normal. And the never normal is we think, a profoundly useful way. It's not just a conjunction of words. It's a profoundly useful way of thinking about the next, 3 to 5 years. If we're wrong on the never normal, you feel welcome to come back and say to me in 5 months' time, hey, you were wrong, it's the new normal, everything's stabilized. And I can tell you, I will be opening the champagne as quickly as you will. But we don't think that's happening. We think what's going to happen is we've got terrific instability in the way in which we think about things for years to come. And it's good to accept that now. It's a positive thing to be realistic and say, now we can begin to plan around this. And one of the things that entails, and I think it's important to set this up before we get into the 5 major points I want to make. One of the things that entails is that if we think about the future as being certain, we won't do the right kind of planning. And I think what we're going to see is a great deal of strategic wastage in our thinking over the next few years. And we have to be prepared to accept that. So strategy people are going to be working twice as hard as ever before, because they're going to have to cycle through a lot more thinking about scenarios than we are used to doing. And this is just a critical point. Now, part of that thinking is about how do people respond to this? Like I said, most of the companies on this call, probably all of them, can't really do that much about, unless you're a pharma company and you're on the verge of getting, of defeating the virus, you can't do much about the epidemiological uncertainty. You can do a tiny bit about the recession uncertainty, but each company on its own, not a lot. But you can do something about the people uncertainty, both around your employees and your customers. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about 5 of the things that we've found, which have held out to be, I'm happy to say, we speculated on this 2 months ago, and these have really turned out to be real. And there is a lot of data we can share with you afterwards, but we don't have the time in this to share with you, which back up each and every one of these points quantitatively in terms of what people are saying. We've studied 15 markets around the world, about 7,500 consumers in each market. And we're doing that survey about once every 3 weeks, and the numbers coming through really dramatically support all of these points. The points are the cost of confidence, the virtual century, every business is a health business now, cocooning, where we center ourselves, and the reinvention of authority. So if we go on to the first one, please, Kaiser. So the cost of confidence is all about the way in which we have been knocked backwards by the pandemic. You know, everyone's told us, you know, what has happened here is that people and places and now things, because we don't even know whether the virus can be carried on cardboard, all of these things carry this threat to us, this threat to our future that might change our future. Not just about us getting very ill, but everything has been turned upside down. And what that means is that we're all realizing we better have a plan B. And where people may not have been talking about a black swan event before, everyone now knows what a black swan event is. They're probably not going to read the book, but they do know what the idea is. And this has been a fundamental change in our thinking. Next slide. So it's really hit our confidence very deeply. And a second wave would really deepen this issue. And I talked about buying the milk earlier, but what I'm really talking about there is degree of commitment. You know, going out and buying that milk requires a certain degree of commitment, but frankly, not very much. It's not that dramatic. Buying a holiday, that's a different level of commitment. Buying a car, that's a different level of commitment. Deciding to rebuild your kitchen at home, that's a high degree of commitment. You know, and we can, there are many of them, you know, taking your kids back to school. So because of all of those things, everything becomes a much more anxious process, and we have to think long and hard about all of these things. Next slide, please. So the result of that is that purchase decisions are clearly being postponed. Now, some of that is unlocking right now. We're beginning to see signs of dramatically renewed spending in a whole number of markets. It happened very quickly in China when the lockdown was over. But nonetheless, major decisions, many major decisions are still difficult. If we're unsure about the recession, should I buy a car? If we're unsure about travel, should I travel to Spain for a holiday this summer, etc., etc. The fatigue with the news is growing, so we have to be very careful about how we communicate with our customers and our employees, because we have to say the right things at the right time. When those messages are needed, they're really needed. But beware now of flooding your market or your customers with messaging they actually don't need because they've heard so much about it. The familiar becomes extremely important to us. Next, please. So what all of this ladders up to is that we need to really think about the end-to-end experiences that our services and our products are offering customers, and we need to actually literally run an experience scan over that end-to-end journey. Think about the pint of milk, think about the litre of milk, but expand it into what your business is about. And you need to focus on where are the hot points where customers are going to really need confidence, because those hot points really now matter. There's two Chinese grocery companies, when they deliver to your home, this is takeaway food actually, are bringing with them notes that show the exact body temperatures of all the people involved in the cooking and packing and delivery process. It's exceptional. Over the top, maybe, but you've got to hand it to them. They've thought through what the investment in confidence they need to make is, and they're making that investment, and we all have to do that. Next, please. So the virtual century is and I have to say, all of these observations are obvious. So I don't think there's rocket science in any of them. The virtual century is that suddenly we're all online. So you may say, well, hang on a moment, we were all online before. Well, true, for a lot of some things. And I've been doing digital as Celia has. Well, I'm a bit older than Celia, so I've probably been doing it longer, but I've been doing it since 1993. And I've watched, from early skepticism through, everyone coming online and doing our shopping and email and, work, etc. But actually what just happened is that everything went online. Next slide, please. So shopping we're already doing, but the laggards who weren't, they came online. And this is true. The degree to which this is individually true in the Nordics compared to lots, I know the Nordics have traditionally been in advance of many markets in terms of its digital acceptance. But in many markets, the laggards have come online because they actually had no choice whatsoever in the first few weeks of lockdown. It was the only place they could transact or get food or do the things that they needed to do. And those things they needed to do are things we hadn't necessarily been associating with being online before. Health, so telehealth, online yoga. So yoga is such an interesting one to watch. I was talking to a yoga teacher the other day, and she said, I've realized that my business has permanently moved online. And I said, how can you be so sure? She said, people do it in the comfort of their own home. They can wear what they want. They can find the teacher they want at the time that is appropriate to them. They don't have to travel to a yoga studio. And most of all, they don't have to walk into a shower afterwards that 2 other people have just been in. Now, when you look at it like that, you think, whoa, that's something that's not going back into the real world, probably, you know, even if only 40% has shifted online, that's significant. And then you look at learning, you know, all of our children have been learning, well, many of our children have been learning all over the world from home. Mine are right now. Work, you know, many of us are sitting at home now. I know you're beginning to go back. I know some people are in Nordics, but in most of the world, we're still working from home. Socializing, walking in on my 29-year-old daughter during lockdown in my bedroom in the middle of the day and discovering she was having a Zoom birthday party where they were all dressed up and dancing to ABBA at 11 o'clock in the morning. It was fantastic, but what I saw was, whoa, so now birthday parties happen online. So the big question is, we move on one, what do we keep when we come out of this? And well, that's one question. Another is, how do we look after the laggards who've come online? Because a large number of people are now doing things they were not used to doing online before. And we now need to look to the way in which we've streamlined the hurdles of going virtual and re-examine that and work out whether we're doing the right thing for the right people. So I do think there are an inflection point in design here where we're going to have to think about the large number of people coming on and doing different things and think, have we actually got this right? Or do we need to reinvent the way in which we're doing this? We expect to see an uptick in virtual and augmented reality as we come out of the pandemic. And the reason for that, next slide please, is because we've lost our 270-degree vision. So what I mean by that is that in real life, you have this peripheral vision. But on digital, you don't have peripheral vision because you're focused on the screen. So I can see, all I can see right now is a presentation and some of my fellow speakers, and everything else has disappeared. Now, when I'm in a shop, I can see the shampoo over there because it's green or pink or whichever one my daughters have asked for. And I know I can swivel now and go over there and get it. At work, I can see Celia out of the corner of my eye and I think, I really need to have a chat with Celia about that project I'm working on e-commerce because I know that she's got something useful to add to it, but I don't see Celia out of the corner of my eye when I'm online. It doesn't happen. So there's lots we've lost in our peripheral vision, and we're going to have to, that also means when you think about it, extreme competition for attention on screen. And if I had to put it in a nutshell, it would be hire a TV producer. TV producers know something about how to grab attention, keep attention, and play out a narrative. We are all going to have to get much better at that because the relatively static way we've been using digital, that isn't going to work when everybody is doing so much staring at screens. If we move on to the next slide, please. So one of the things to think about here is we all came online rapidly to try and deal with some of the things which are lower down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like where's my food and can I get money, you know, how do I move money around? It's relatively low. I don't think Maslow wrote about that, but you know what I mean. It's functional stuff. As we begin to come out of the pandemic, so more stuff which is less functional and more about higher order needs will begin to come out. And what's going to be really interesting is see the tension between whether we want to do those things online or we want to do those things offline. And our bet at the moment is that much of life's activity has permanently shifted online for some of the hidden reasons that I explored with the yoga example earlier. Next slide, please. So the third one is that every business effectively becomes a health business. And you may be looking at this and thinking, what, really? Hang on a moment. I'm a retailer. I'm not a health business, or I'm a bank. I'm not a health business. Well, just hold up, because everyone's become a hypochondriac overnight, and all of the statistical science is that is not going away. You know, again, we can send this to you afterwards, but amazing stats about how many people are saying, yes, I discovered the joys of washing my hands during the pandemic, but I absolutely intend to go on doing that afterwards. I'm cleaning things more manically than I was before, and I'm going to go on cleaning things manically afterwards. Next slide. But even more than that, people are saying, I really need to look after my health. I'm not sure that health structures can do that, and therefore I'm going to be spending more money on it. So everyone's going to spend more on health. This is if I have to put it in harsh, cynical business terms, this is a huge opportunity. More governments will spend more, our employees will spend more on health, and we ourselves will spend more on health. So let's be really clear. What we're not saying is that everybody has to go into the health business. You don't have to discover your inner peloton in order to make money out of this, but you do have to look at your business and think, where is health important in my business? So banks is a good example. So in what way could banks possibly be in the health business? Well, ATMs. You know, ATMs suddenly look like a very dead technology, a bit like fax machines. Certainly mentally, I've got a picture in my head of fax machines and ATMs in a big junkyard somewhere. And I think that's coming pretty soon. And cash. In fact, WHO report that every note in the world contains on average about 40,000 bacteria. Now, those notes contained 40,000 bacteria 6 months ago, but nobody worried about, well, okay, I didn't worry about it. I don't think some people did, but most people didn't worry about it. Now we worry about it. So cash looks pretty dead as well. So, and then bank branches, huge investment. They were already questionable. Now you have to think, well, is there a role for branches? So it turns out that banks do have to be in the health business after all. And then think about the fact that 55% of people are spending much more time with their mental health, worrying about their mental health and doing something about it. Well, we know there's a correlation between mental health and financial health. So quite possibly there's an opportunity space for banks to to partially reinvent what they're about. So actually we are in the health business after all. We have to take out ATMs, we have to reconfigure our branches, and we should be looking after the mental well-being of our customers because there's clear evidential market demand for that. And lastly on this slide, another business which has been affected by this is cars. So as they came out of the lockdown in China, people quite rationally looked around and said, well, I'm not sure I want to travel by subway or bus anymore, particularly packed in Beijing and other major markets. So I'm going to buy a car. So Ipsos did a survey and said, well, what do you want out of the car? And what people were reporting was not 0 to 60 really, really fast, or a fantastic booming hi-fi system or leather seats. It was, I want air conditioning with a germ filter. Well, who knew that was a thing in cars? Automobile manufacturers have been in the safety business for years, but suddenly they're in the health business. Next slide, please. So a bit like the experience scan, look at what you are doing. And retailers have had to do this a lot already as they open up. But look at what you do and look where health may be an issue. And I have to say, importantly, this is for your employees as well, as much as it is for customers. And figure out where you're going to need to act. But this is also about innovation. There are opportunities here, as I try to show with the bank example. Next slide, please. So the fourth one is, we all went home. We were told to go home by our companies, by our governments, by our families, and we were told this is your safe space. And so home is a place we've gone to. And whereas with the virtual century, we reinvented the locus of our attention has shifted dramatically to online. This is about the locus of our being shifting dramatically to home. Next, please. And what that means is we're going to see a dramatic rise in the proportion of spending, of home spending. So that is spending both made at home, as we demonstrated with virtual, and that changes your context. This is not about e-commerce, just about e-commerce. It's actually about the mentality of where you are when you do that. And that shift in context is very important because your focal point is home, but also spending made on the home. I saw actually just yesterday that as IKEA are opening up, they're seeing demand surge back as people are spending on home improvements. And we predicted all along that comfort, because this is our nest and we want to line it with feathers, comfort is going to be a huge growth area. But also we're seeing it with safety products and technology. Health at home has boomed. We've all observed the rise of Peloton. Next slide, please. So, and this is happening because, one of the key parts of this is that people, and we get asked this question a lot, is everyone going to go back to their studios and offices, or are they going to continue to work from home? And I know not everyone works in studios and offices, but for those of us who do, those of us who do have a choice, it turns out that very significant numbers are going to make the choice whether they work from home before on the left-hand side, or have never worked from home before on the right-hand side. We're making that choice and planning to do so in the future. Now, even if you discount these figures by a lot, just imagine that 20%, lower than the numbers you're seeing on here, that 20% of people don't go back to work full-time, that they stay at home 2 or 3 days a week. Now imagine the place you work with 20% less people in. Imagine the travel to work with 20% less people. And most importantly, imagine the cafes, bars and restaurants around the place that you work with 20% less customer flow. That's probably their annual profit margin that's just gone. And those people will need to be served. And again, there's opportunity on the flip side of the coin here. Next slide, please. Those people will need to be served at home. So everything will radiate out from the home. And we're seeing clear indications on this. Trust, and the biggest signal of that are the number of people who are saying, I am now buying more locally because I've had to, and I'm also buying products and services which are sourced more locally. Key distinction there. One of those I have to do, the other one I don't have to do. And what we're seeing is customers all over the world saying, and I intend to go on doing this afterwards. And it looks like people have hit some kind of a reset button. Next slide, please. And that reset button is saying, I've had to do things about food waste, and I'm going to go on doing it. That's making me think more about sustainability. I've spent more time with my family, and that's important to me. I know I'm loading a lot of points in here now because I'm running out of time, but it, you know, all of this, just think about your customers. You know, what happens when you relocate yourself psychologically, because that's what's happened. And we're seeing really strong signs that local, sustainable, family, community, these things have all become enormously important. And my last point on this is look to the home for inspiration around innovation. One of my favorite moments of the pandemic, if you can say such a thing, just a couple of days in, looking at one of our designers in London who posted a picture of Instagram that she was using an ironing board as a desk, and she could use it because very cramped flat with 2 other flatmates and there was no space, but the ironing board could go up and she could stand, or it could come down, it could be a desk. I mean, just brilliant home innovation. You know, sort of, if I was IKEA, who I think maybe on the call, I would be paying close attention to what is happening in the home. But I don't think it's just IKEA. I think as many organizations can benefit. Home has become the biggest innovation center in the world. So the last one of these trends that I'm going to talk about is the reinvention of authority. If we can move on a slide, please. So the reinvention of authority has 2 aspects to it. Next slide, please. One is that we you know, government has reasserted its authority in our lives in a dramatic and surprising way. Don't be fooled. This is not about trust. So trust in government across the world varies wildly. It's about 98% in China. It's about 50%, probably unsurprisingly, in Brazil. But compliance is universally high in the 90% right the way across the world. And this has fundamentally shifted the way in which we think about government. But at the same time, we've had a parallel shift in the way in which we think about organizations and companies. Next slide, please. So companies have played a much more, here we go, in fact, here is a trust and compliance point, but I've made this so we'll move on, and we can share this deck afterwards if you're interested in the numbers. Okay, so could move on 1 slide, please. So this also applies to companies, and we had observed this before. Celia mentioned Fjord Trends at the beginning of this, and we had said in Fjord Trends 2020 that we were at a tipping point where people were going to have to start, companies were going to start building purpose into the center of what they did alongside profit. Well, wow, COVID really accelerated that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So it was happening, but now we see organizations all over the world stepping in and saying, actually, what we do in this crisis matters. We see that with LVMH, you know, the French luxury brand making a hand sanitizer, Dyson, who make things that suck and blow air, suddenly making ICUs. You know, all sorts of organizations have really shifted their purpose. And in fact, again, and I'm saying this, that I literally, this is very fresh, but yesterday I saw IKEA, you know, giving money back to European governments that initially was offered to them to help look after their workers because they've realized the financial hit was not so hard. That is amazing. And I you know, what IKEA are doing now, and other companies similarly, is what they're doing is being watched by consumers, and they're showing that their values have come down off the wall of the boardroom and they're walking those values. And you know, not all companies have done that, and all companies, of course, there will be, you know, everybody, it's never simple. Everybody, there will be a dark side that, you know, that the media will uncover or will be talked about. But by and large, those companies that have responded brilliantly to the pandemic will be remembered for it. But even more, next slide, please. What will happen afterwards is that we will not only will we remember, but it's permanently shifted what we expect from companies, because suddenly companies have stepped into a space where they're acting as authorities in our lives because they're engaged in this community purpose of trying to defeat the pandemic. And that has forever shifted on its axis the relationship we as employees and as customers have with companies. So a very big shift in how we think about government and next slide, please, and organizational authority. And if I just leave you with one thought on that, it's if you're going to discover purpose, the crisis purpose is one thing, and I've covered a couple of companies that have done that so well. But afterwards, the purpose will be about metrics. Find the things that really matter to your employees, probably most importantly, and to customers as well, and then put a number on it and start measuring it. So I'm a little over time. I apologize, Marianne and Celia, for doing that. It's so hard to get through all of this in 20 minutes and so much to say, but I'll stop there. And if I had to leave you with one thought, it would be get down and understand what it is people are thinking, because that is there are tensions out there between, for example, luxury and simplicity. Do I keep my new simple lifestyle, or when I'm allowed outdoors, do I run around and buy expensive dresses and swig expensive champagne? Which is it going to be? And we have to be on top of these changes. And of course, all of those, if there are fresh outbreaks of the pandemic, come under threat. So we really have to listen.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing that fascinating perspective with us and thoughts about how we can address the crisis. I think on that note about how do we really listen and understand and respond, that's an almost perfect segue into introducing Marianne, who's going to tell us about some of the great work that she's been doing in Denmark. So over to you, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Celia, and thank you, Mark, for sharing your perspectives. And I know that you needed to rush a little bit in the end, but luckily I think that I'll go back to some of the points that you already made, Mark, because they are really fundamental truth that we have also discovered in our work. So I will now go through a presentation and try to share with you the brand perspective of things here. At Hjaltelin Stahl, we have been quite reluctant in this period of time to come out with these very self-assured, these are the 3 best advice in coming through in the corona crisis, because we have really felt that we were going into unknown territory here. We have felt that we needed a high degree of sensitivity and a lot of nuance, depending on the different brands that we were working with. Day by day change in the development of the virus, market by market, having a lot of Swedes here. We just know how different it has been approached in Denmark and Sweden. So there's so many differences here that we have to be sensible around. And to us, it's been important to have an eye for that sensitivity. And if there's going to be one cocksure advice after today, I actually think that sensitivity is the biggest part. And that's very much what you said, Mark, about listening. Because we are entering a time where we need to be able to navigate opposing forces more than ever. We will see people that are valuing the hygiene part, the comfort, the trust. It's a little too fast with the slide shifts here. Sorry, yeah, a lot of people who would be valuing the quality. We did a survey with Coop showing that a lot of people would definitely be willing to pay for local, to pay for something that they can trust in. But on the other hand side, we also know that will come an economic crisis, and maybe the same people who really want to value the local and the trust, they will be hit by financial crisis. So we also need to give to them some opportunities within the discount area as well. So yes, that's one opposing trend. And we also see the beginning of the dichotomy between the close relations. I just love this picture of an 11-year-old who did like a hugging curtain to hug her grandparents during quarantine, and that's wonderful. But we also begin to hear people that they are a little bit suffocating in the closeness of the family and seeing the same people over and over again. And we also, as brands, need to understand where's the audience in the situation. And going on, then we have had a long period of time where we could say community spirit. Okay, everyone, we need to stand together and show community spirit. But as we just said with the Wanderlust, we also see a beginning desire for freedom, a little bit of anarchy, and people who want to break out of that very directing way of being told what to do. Yes. And even though that Mark said that, would you ever go back to the gym, to the yoga class, to that smelly bathroom? We also see that some people really want to. So definitely, some people, they are finding brand new digital ways of meeting up and doing exercise and all kinds of stuff. But we're also seeing others that are just almost, we just opened the fitness centers in Denmark this week, I think, or last week, and there were almost lines. I mean, there was some so eager to go back and having what they would say was the real meeting and get the social aspects of the training as well. Yes. And all of these different opposing trends, they are much easier to handle if you know the foundation of your brand and its values. That's really, really important. And it's much easier to navigate when you know that, because if you have a strong brand, it enables you to have direction and drive the way of moving forward here. And unless you can move on one here, and in less complex time, in more stable times, you are able to do a more solid brand foundation and stick to it. But here we have seen that we really need some elasticity in our brands because times are changing all the time. So now more than ever, we need to look at brands in another way. So what we need to consider already when we define our brand, when we do brand work, is how does your brand actually act when it's going forward, when it's the leader of the situation. In other situations where we have seen, where you also have to stand still and be a little bit in the background, that maybe your message is not relevant. We have situations where your brand stops to exist in real life, like the fitness example before. It's only existing digitally. What kind of a brand experience are we really giving? We have had different brands that had to totally park the sales goals. If you were a travel agency, some car retailers and so on, they really had to stop the sales goals in the beginning of this pandemic. What's left? Is it only silence, or do we have something else to talk about in these periods? And then, of course, we are also having the need, we are in a commercial business here, so we also have the need to still go out and fight really hard for our share of wallet, and the wallets are getting smaller. So how do we sound without being too cynical in this period of time when we also go out with our sales message here? So we really need to practice different voices, different roles, but based on the same foundation here. And that's what we call situational brand behavior. And you might remember, if we shift one, the textbooks from situational leadership. And that's actually inspired us in this project, because as a leader, we know that we cannot have the same behavior to all kinds of employees in all periods of the business lifetime. We need to shift our leadership behavior depending on the insecurity of times, the insecurity of the employee. And it's actually a bit of the same if you shift to the next, being a brand. There would be situations where brands in this period that we're going through here need to be very directing. And in others, they can go a little softer, step a little bit backwards and be more coaching and supporting. And it was actually in the work that we did with Coop that this became obvious for us. And we were really discussing the voice that we needed to have. We had a brand foundation, but how was the voice in the different phases that we were going through? And that's why we called it situational brand behavior. Luckily, in Coop's case, we have had a very well-defined purpose, and it's been defined for more than 150 years in Denmark. And it's, of course, to ensure the good and meaningful food supply for the many. So that's the background for Coop, and that was what we were working through. And I will now take you through some of the phases that we have been through in those last 3 months. And in hindsight, I think it feels like 3 years. A Corona week equals a normal year, or something like that. And I think that most Danes will remember March 11th. This is our Prime Minister coming out and effectively locking down the country. And what happened next was hoarding. It was toilet paper gate, like everywhere else. And of course, especially a retailer like Coop had an extraordinary responsibility in this particular situation to make sure that we established trust and we could convince people that there was we had control over the food supply. And the good thing about Coop that they were actually showing a really big preparedness initiated from day one. They set up a war room in the headquarters, you can see here, and they had the management team and all the vital function meeting up every day by the hour. And what was really interesting also was that we, from the beginning, were thinking we need marketing, we need communication to be part of this, because that's also a way of creating trust. And we went through 5 different phases here, and we changed it a lot as we went. We thought that we could go from phase 1 to 2. It would take time, then it could move faster than we thought, and we need to stay in a phase a little longer than expected. But I will just briefly go through this with you now, all the things that were happening. In the first phase, it was the immediate crisis, and we needed to go out and do crisis communication. It was very directing if we are looking at the model of the situational leadership. So we were giving directions, and if you move one ahead, you can see, as I guess you know from the other market, it was all the advice. Remember to sneeze in your elbow and keep distance, and we were putting up more than 25,000 floor stickers to make distant markers. We were setting up hand sanitizers, the plexiglass, and all of it. So that was a very directing phase. And from there, we went into more acting phase, so where we led with concrete actions. We initiated a partnership with the Danish Red Cross so that we could help some of the people had troubles in doing their own grocery, if they had a lung disease or something like that. So that was a really good, we helped finding people that could help each other in the community. And the other thing that was really important in this period of time was the digital tools. Fortunately, Coop, they actually had a very good infrastructure with digital tools, and the contactless payment and everything was in place. And we actually saw during that period, as you can see in the chart on the right side here, that we had a 300% raise in the use of the contactless payment. And that's definitely something that's going to stick afterwards. So that was important. And then moving from here, and we are now 1 month in, we are approaching Easter here, and it was already time to say, okay, now this is becoming a little bit of an everyday. So we could begin to reestablish trust and reestablish confidence and have focus on that. And we did some newspaper ads saying, okay, thank you guys, you have really been good, and now let's stick together about this new everyday life that we are entering. And one thing is a big thing, if you guys just go on back, one big thing in retail is, of course, the Easter. It's always a lot of people gathering. And now we had a year where people couldn't gather in families and in the summer house as they normally did. And what we did was quite a different Easter campaign, because we were inviting everyone for a virtual Easter lunch. So we set up a quick website where we did inspiration for online gaming, for recipes, for songs that you could sing asynchronously from different locations and so on. And it was actually a massive success that a lot of families engaged through. So a very different way from the normal snaps and herring Easter campaign that we would do here. From there, we went into phase 4, and we are actually still in phase 4, the reorientation phase. It's where we are going to see what's this actually meaning for our business going forward. As you started saying, Celia, what's next? How do we work with what we have now, and what will it mean for our business going forward? And since Coop is a cooperative, of course, they did this in co-creation with the members. We did a large survey among 2,000 members. We did a lot of online polling and gathering information from suppliers, from employees, and from customers to see how do the Danes want to move on from here. What have we learned? What should we bring on for the future? And we were, if you click to the next one, we were gathering all the very, very valuable input that we got from all over the country, from all over the different segments. Some were still very scared, some were just, let's move on. So we got a lot of nuance and perspective. And this was something that we did, I think we was in late April. And that made us actually to rethink the full strategic approach for Coop going forward. So they took all the initiatives that were already in plan strategically, and then they did what we called Coop's large restart plan. if you click one, the restart plan has 6 different areas. So one thing was that we were looking into the cooperative model. It's actually shown us to be really, really solid in this situation, because you have members that are invested in your brand that actually wants to support it every day. So that's a model that we are now encouraging others and helping through crowdfunding, helping startups in food innovation to make companies and doing that co-op model going forward. So that's really good. Another thing is that we were talking about the whole green climate agenda has been really, really big earlier on. But now we were a little bit afraid. Are people willing to talk about climate anymore? But luckily, when we saw all the input, it was actually really top of mind of many of the people say, when we go back, let's make sure that we restart with green solutions. It's actually a chance of escalating the green agenda to many of the consumers. Then we saw, as I just mentioned, the digital, and that's of course something that we should just do even more of as Coop going forward, making sure that all our tools, all our infrastructure digitally is in place here. And we can also see that some of the temporary hygiene initiatives that we did in stores, they would of course be permanent going forward. It actually makes quite good sense that you hand sanitize before picking up greens and vegetables in a grocery store. It's a little bit embarrassing, I think, for all of us that it took a pandemic to realize that. Another thing is, of course, to take care and take responsibility in the reboot of Danish economy. So it's also about supporting Danish suppliers, and we are doing a big summer campaign now with focus on Danish vegetables and some of the strong Danish food suppliers that we have out here to help them also get back on their feet after a difficult time for them. And then we also know, as I mentioned earlier, that some people will be hit quite hard on this on the financial side. So we also have to keep innovating to provide decent food, decent groceries at decent prices, because this is not just everyone turning into luxury people that can afford to pay anything for the high trust. We still need to have a low price point to accommodate for these people. And then one really good thing that I think is important for everyone is that we actually saw a newfound respect, a newfound pride also in the frontline personnel in retail. It hasn't been the most respected jobs, to be honest, in the future or in the past. And it's been difficult also for Coop to recruit young people for that. But since they have been seen as everyday heroes, they have had a lot of positive response in their daily jobs. We just see a new pride, and that's definitely something that we need to leverage going forward for Coop as well. So that's the restart plan that we're still working on. And then very briefly, I'll just touch upon another project that we did, and that was part of the whole reflection phase. We actually entered a cooperation with Coop, with Danish Red Cross, Hjaltelin Stahl, Accenture Interactive, and the Danish National Museum for Art. And then we were gathering, if you just click one, we have a website and we have a mobile website where we have built this monument. So all the little images that you can see here are individuals who have uploaded a picture of themselves with their hand and written a little statement on how this whole situation have affected them. And it's really touching. Some of them are in English, so if you can't understand Danish, you can also go visit and you can upload your own little story. And then all these different statements, they will be handed to 3 different artists, and they would try to create a piece of artwork based on all these different statements, and then they would be exhibited on the Danish National Museum and be revealed and going on a national tour on the date of the lockdown in 2021. So we are trying also to make a little bit of a long-term monument of everything that we have been going through as a little, you could say, extra activity here. Yes. So this was highlights of 3 hectic months with Coop, and it's been months that really made sense. And being that the payoff for Coop, that actually really made sense, and it has really tested and also strengthened our brand foundation for Coop, and demonstrated the elasticity. Okay, Coop at sometimes could also be quite directing and say, this is what you need to do, guys, and sometimes very inclusive. It was actually possible to do that within the same core brand, so that's been crucial. And not only with Coop, but with many of our clients in these passing months, we have been working much closer, and we have been working with a much bigger agility than normal. And that's really something that I will take forward. And I would say, okay, we have seen the effect of the ability to make decisions and act on things. And I hope that we will bring that forward. And I totally agree with what already been said about, I don't think that we are going back totally to the old normal. But on the other hand, I'm not expecting a totally new normal on the other side. We are habit animals, that we would go back and do a lot of things exactly as we did before. But what I think is that we can look into this never normal. We would look into a period of time with way more shifts that we have been used to. And what I think that you should do at this time, and we dare not say post-corona, but at least a little bit post the initial shock, that is to revisit your brand foundation. Make sure that it's solid, make sure it's clear and authentic, that it's elastic. Begin talking about what's our voice when we can't talk. Then what? Are we just silent, or what's happening then? Is the organization actually unified around it? As Mark said, the purpose agenda is very much also about getting an inspired and dedicated organization. So that's really important. And secondly, it's the practice of brand empathy. If you want to practice situational brand behavior, you really need to listen and understand the situation that your customers are in. So it's very much about empathy. It's really putting yourself in their shoes and making sure that you know where and how you as a brand or a company can be truly relevant in their situation. And thirdly, of course, the digitalization. That's important, but it's also important that you think about your heart and your brand heart. We have everybody's been through a life stress test of digitalization. What stood, what fell in this period? And what was the actual brand experience? Could I still feel your brand when I was only interacting with it in a digital way? When I didn't have the smile of the cashier or whoever normally delivers the brand experience to me. So remember not only to digitalize, but remember the heart. And finally, of course, it's also, you know, everybody knows when life hands you lemons analogy. And I think that the world had been handed quite a lot of lemons right now. And of course, we would love to make lemonade, all of us. And I know that this advice could be almost provocative if your business is down 40, 60%, as some people, some areas are. But at least think about, are there new partnerships that we can form? If I can't invest in something with money, can I invest with time? Can I share knowledge with some of the partners? We have seen that some of the strong ones in a value chain, they could maybe go in and buy or form partnership with a supplier. And if you're that really hard hit supplier, maybe it's time to get a new partner in your business as well. And what are the platforms, what are the forums that we should set up for next time, both digitally, but also maybe just a phone line where you know who to call, who to talk to if this happens again. And in a never normal future, something like this are most likely to happen again. So I think that was it. That was the main points for the month that we have been through here, exemplified with this one customer and the work that we have been doing with them. And things are, we are talking fast here. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out through mail or phone or anything afterwards. Yes.
Good. Thank you so much, Marianne. It's I love the work that you've been doing with Coop. I think showing that range and variety of initiatives really that you've taken and way of thinking about it is really fascinating. I think we've got time for a few questions. So one thing I thought was really interesting. Mark, you talked about this, you know, being prepared for strategic wastage, which I think was a really interesting sort of idea. You know, lots of execs, you know, they need to make investment decisions. So they're thinking, well, how do I make sure that I'm not spending on money that things are going to fail? But obviously, you know, there's kind of uncertainty at this time. I just wondered if you had, and I'll also ask to you, Marianne, in a second, but starting with Mark, do you have any sort of tips or thoughts to tell us a bit more about this, how people can navigate this idea?
So I want to make it clear that I'm talking about strategic thinking wastage, not about strategic waste in investing in assets which are then useless. I'm not recommending that, although of course that may happen, but we have got to hope that it doesn't happen. It's not a good way to run a business. So in terms of the strategic thinking, the key point which I did make quickly at the end was you've got to really fine-tune your listening capabilities, both to your customers and your employees. And you've got to understand the direction of travel of some of the tensions. And Marianne actually highlighted some of these tensions as well early on in what she was talking about. Are people going to run back to gyms, or, and of course some people are. And I think a good guidance system for thinking how people are going to behave is to look at, if you like, the key human drivers of why we do the things that we do. So let me get down to brass tacks on this. If you're asking a question about whether people are going to do something, look at whether it's deeply embedded in our genes. So stuff which is deeply embedded in our genes by evolution is stuff we are likely to go back to doing. So, one of our designers asked me a couple of months ago, in a moment of total despair, literally, he said he was wailing and saying, will we ever go back to tapas bars? And yes, he was Mediterranean, and be close to each other and hug. That was literally the question. And I said, yes. And he said, well, why are you so confident? And I said, sex. It's pretty deeply embedded in our genes. It's just that is a fact of evolution. And we are sociable creatures for a whole number of reasons, but that's one of the key drivers. So particularly the younger you are. So, yes, those things are going to go back. We do enjoy meeting with each other. And can we go back to gyms? If we, when we go back to gyms, of course we'll do some of that because we want to, and we want to meet people, etc. But then there are other things which are perhaps more driven by social conditioning or cultural conditioning that we might not go back to doing. So I would argue that, yoga is not deeply embedded in our genes. It's a cultural thing. And we will, yes, we like it, so we go on doing it because we know it does us good, but there's nothing in our genetic makeup that says it has to take place in one place or another. So again, I'll go back to the point that we only need, this is a percentages game. You only need what sounds like a relatively small percentage shift, maybe 30%, for the market to be tilted dramatically. And this is true for working at home. It's true for business travel. I mean, the numbers on business travel are shocking. If you're an airline, you really want to close your eyes and not look at what people, and I, until a few months ago, traveled exhaustively. I don't want to go back to it. And apparently, the more frequent the business traveler, the more they're saying, uh-oh, I've rediscovered stuff here. So the strategic thinking, I'm sorry, a very long-winded answer. You've got to look at the tensions, and you've got to look at the way in which people are going to behave. And if you want a guidance system, think about, is this cultural conditioning or is this deeply genetic?
Yeah, my uncle runs a company and does a lot of, he's in Australia, does a lot of work in Asia, but apparently he was saying he's feeling fantastic because he now realizes he's been jet lagged for 25 years. Marianne, do you have any thoughts to add to this question?
I'm just very happy to find out it's not a genetic flaw in me that I'm not that much into yoga. So that's nice to know. But another point that I think that I've also heard you say, Mark, that we should look at segmentation in a new way. Instead of looking at demographics and income, maybe we should look at people's level of trust, level of confidence. And it's actually also a way of being good listeners, having that sensitivity, really understanding what do we do to the segments that are scared, that continue to be scared, that's really been hit by insecurity by this, and what do we do to the ones who are just going on all behind them. They're full with confidence and the wanderlust that we talked about. So I think that that's also a new dimension to basic segmentation that I think that we should take on with us from here.
I think that's a fantastic point, Marianne, and you put me in mind of a chart I saw written by some of our colleagues in Accenture Research on this consumer survey they've been doing in waves over the last few months, and they just introduced it a couple of waves ago. And one of the things it shows is that a couple of key dimensions to think about, and it's so simple, is do people have more or less free time, and do they have more or less money, disposable income? And it's a killer segmentation. and it's totally different from the way we think. And you know, the world is now, at least definitely in a lot of developed markets, the world is fragmenting into people who are, you know, they may have more free time, but they may have considerably less money, or they have more free time and actually quite a lot more money. I know, talking to banks in Ireland about a month and a half ago, they were saying savings are going through the roof, but it's not true for everyone. It's true on aggregate for them, but those people who've been furloughed or laid off, they may have more time, significantly less money. So the point I'm making here is, it's easy to get distracted by talking about the disease because it's such an interesting and awful subject, but the recession is probably the thing that really counts here, because the recession is going to, you know, dramatically. So it's a combination of the two. It's the free time, and you make a great point about look at the segmentation.
Absolutely. We're going to have to wrap up there because we're a little over time, but thank you so much, Mark and Marianne, for joining today. Thank you for everyone in the audience for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. We will send out a recording and a link to Mark's presentation after this. Thank you all once again, and have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.